Hello, everybody. My name is Linda Thompson. I'm a national coordinator with the Women's Support Project, and I am absolutely delighted to be hosting this conversational, let's think of it as a conversational cafe about Many Good Men, which was a project led and developed by Civic Digits, which was really a participant project to develop partnerships to explore the radicalization of masculinity online. We have brought together a group of key stakeholders, and we're going to have a conversation about this particular piece of work to share our learning and really try to capture in many ways some of the learning that doesn't go into formal funding evaluation reports. I'm not going to say too much about the project because Claire, who is in the call, who led on it from Civic Digital, will be giving you a wee bit more information about that in a few minutes. But we decided that we wanted this conversation approach really for this meeting because it reflects the work that was done through Civic Digits with Many Good Men, but it also really reflects that call to action around how we need to open doors and create spaces for dialogue, not just with young people, but also much broader amongst ourselves as workers, but also amongst ourselves as community members, really, on some of these key issues about masculinity, about radicalization, about gender-based violence, and what can we do about this in our culture and our society. So we want to have a conversation this afternoon. But I'm absolutely delighted to have a really interesting, diverse group of people here present in this space today. So I'm going to, before we kind of go any further, I want to give them all a chance to introduce yourselves. So as a start, I said my name is Linda Thompson. As you probably guessed, I'm an Northern Irish woman. I have I would say an interesting mix of hair dye colours. I'm grey, pink, white and red. I said I'm a white woman, and at this moment in time, I'm sporting a very colourful dress. But I'd like, first of all, to introduce and to invite an invitation from Claire, Claire Duffy from Civic Digits. So Claire, it would be really great if you could just give a little bit of an introduction to yourself, your organisation, the connection to the work, really.
Okay, thanks, Linda. So my name's Claire Duffy. I'm the director of Civic Digits. My pronouns are she, her. I'm wearing a grey t-shirt dress. I've got dark rimmed glasses, very short hair, which is slightly Tintin-esque at the front. And yeah, got blue eyes. I'm a white woman. And yeah, I'm the director of Civic Digits. Do you want me to talk about where it started, or should we have everyone introduce themselves?
I think let's just all introduce ourselves and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts about the actual work itself, Claire.
I pass the baton to Katie.
Thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Katie. I use she, her pronouns. I've got hair in plaits, glasses, and a white stripy top on today. I'm the Policy and Practice Officer for Children and Young People at Zero Tolerance, which is Scotland's expert organisation on preventing men's violence against women and girls. I'll pass on to Caroline.
Thanks, Katie. Hello, I'm Caroline Donald. My pronouns are she, her. I am the head of discovery and participation at the Edinburgh International Festival. My visual description is that I have long strawberry blonde hair and I'm wearing a very, very bright orange cardigan today. I wasn't directly involved in working on this project, but we've worked previously with Civic Digits, we've worked previously with Heart of Midlothian, and from the moment that Claire told me the concept for this whole piece and process, I've been really interested, followed and supported it all along. So I'm here today as a sort of wider creative sector, sort of cultural advocate for the work, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Great, Caroline. Now, who are you going to pass the introduction baton to there, Caroline?
I'll pass to Anne.
There you go,
Thank
Anne.
you very much, Caroline. Nice to see you again. Hi, I'm Anne Park. I'm Director for Community and Partnerships at Heart of Midlothian Football Club. I'm a white woman, in my 60s, yeah, in my 60s, in denial, hair of various colours as well, and I use the pronouns she, her, and no, I'm not wearing a football strip. I potentially could, but it wouldn't look that great, but I'm just quite casually dressed today in a t-shirt.
Great, Anne, and then that, by my powers of deduction, that leaves your good self, Justin.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me loud and clear?
We can hear you.
Great. So excited to be in this meeting today. And I'm so happy to also see Caroline, because I can see she's of the Edinburgh International Festival. Yeah, because our group was one of the dancers of the Carnival on Sunday. It was super, super exciting, our youth group. Yeah, so I'm Justin once again, and like you can see, blue and white. Yeah, I'm wearing blue and white, and pronouns he and him. And I work with Passion for Fusion, a charity organization. We partners with the Civic Digits. Some of our young people were involved in the project, some parts of the project, and it's super exciting to see be involved even now, and we'll likely continue to be involved because the whole project, the vision about it all kind of resonates so well with us. So
Brilliant,
thank you so
Justin.
much. It's great to
Great.
be here.
Great, Justin. Thank you so much. What an
And one
interest.
more thing, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
go for it,
Yeah.
Justin.
One more thing, my apologies once again. I'm outside, so I'm not home just yet. It will take me about an hour plus to get home, but I just want to make sure I keep to. Apologies for the noise you could be hearing in the background.
Look, Justin, we know what the life of a youth worker is like. Heather and John everywhere. So we totally appreciate that. And it's just great that you're able to join us. And what an interesting kind of group of people we represent many varied and different sectors. And I think that's a really excellent place to start, because it really does show that this needs to be a multi-agency intersectoral approach, really, doesn't it? So Claire, before we get any further, for anybody listening, they'll be going, well, what are these lot here to talk about, really? So I'm going to hand over to yourself, and then maybe if you could just give us a very quick background, summing up about, you led the project. Could you sum up what Many Good Men was actually all about?
Sure. So Many Good Men started back in lockdown, really, when Katie Brown from COSLA got in touch with us saying that, well, and yourself, Linda.
Yeah.
So the two of you really got in touch with Civic Digits to say that you'd been seeing a lot of predominantly young women joining the sex industry and experiencing a whole raft of different types of abuse. And we put together a group of people to sort of think about what kind of artistic, creative learning intervention we might put together to help support those young women,
Yeah.
or women.
Yeah.
And then sort of through a series of discussions, 3 or 4 discussions, kind of thinking around it, at one point, I think I said, well, why are we making this for women when all of the perpetrators are men?
Men, yeah.
Not the women's fault that they're being abused. It's not the women's fault that they have to go to the sex industry in order to earn their money, even if that's their positive choice. It's not their fault that they're being abused there. So why is this project, why do we think that this should be a project about women protecting themselves? It should be about men not thinking that they're entitled to abuse women for any reason at all,
Yeah.
So that's where it started, really. And at the same time, by coincidence, I read Laura Bates's book that came out that year, Men Who Hate Women, which was a real eye-opener for me, because that's a brilliant book that describes many of all of the different kind of subcategories of what I had never heard of, the manosphere before.
Okay, yeah.
Manosphere, for those who don't know, kind of is a kind of misogynistic community of men predominantly, and it's a sort of an umbrella term for some subgroups like men going their own way who want to kind of be separatist men, MGTOWs, pickup artists, under which you might put what's his name, the guy who's in
Which guy? Are you thinking about Andrew Tate?
Yeah, Andrew Tate. You might
There
put
we
Andrew
go.
Tate underneath a kind of pickup artist banner. He'd
Yeah.
probably deny that, but that's where I kind of locate him. Incels, of course, which is what we ended up talking about the most. And who else? Pickup artists, men going their own way, incels. I'm sure there's some other ones, but anyway, kind of like a group of different sort of communities underneath that umbrella of the manosphere. But the manosphere is this really misogynistic online space the extreme end of which are incels, and incels have been responsible for many mass shootings and for
And
sort of
violence, different acts of violence against
and
women.
promoting rape of women, and promoting, the most extreme
Yeah.
abuse, gender-based misogynistic abuse. And so that's where it started. And I then went and worked, I set up a sort of an initial project working with St Paul's Youth Group in Glasgow.
Yeah.
And I worked with a group of young men there
Yeah.
to find out where they got their cues from about what it means to be a man and what they thought it meant to be a man.
Okay.
And it became very clear from the work that I did with them that football was absolutely at the heart, for good and for ill, of what it meant for those young men to be a man and what masculinity meant to them.
Yeah.
And so we developed a short piece of work which we shared in public with some actors, and sort of developed a narrative that would be able to sort of incorporate the idea of football being at the heart of the show.
Okay.
Well, and so that's when I reached out to Anne and said, would that be something that Hearts would
Being
be
able to work and well
in?
along with. Yeah.
Because we wanted to make the show so that it took place in a football stadium rather than just referring to, so that we could kind of like pull in, I suppose, the status, the iconic status of football in this culture into this conversation about online misogyny. So that's a kind of brief.
So very potted history, Claire.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a sweep on, and it doesn't in any way capture the amount of work that's really happened over the past 3-4 years, on this. But that was incredibly useful, I think, for us to get that sense of where it came from, that, for us, it came from issues that were happening with women, but as you say, about where we need to place the focus actually needs to be on work with men. And I guess, Katie, that chimes a lot with the prevention work that Zero Tolerance has been developing and leading on over a number of years. But I really like, Claire, what you said there about, about that focus, and it's about looking and engaging with young people about where's the key influences that they and key parts of their lives in many ways, both the online, but also looking at sport and kind of activities beyond that. So that's been really useful to start with. I wonder, I mean, I'm just going to open it up after that. Justin, I know that you're still there, even if your camera's still off with you. But, Claire kind of highlighted some of these issues that was coming through from that work with young men, and that kind of led us to this point. I wonder, given that Passion for Fusion works with young people and young men, I wonder, with some of those initial things, would that reflect with what you were seeing in your work? Would that kind of chime with some of the things that you were seeing coming through with that direct work with young men? We've potentially lost Justin in his transition. I
Maybe
suppose
Anne might talk a little bit to what was interesting for them as a football club to be involved in this project.
Yeah. So maybe to pick up on that idea that, Claire said the direct work with young men as part of that initial phase, St Paul's Youth Club over in Glasgow, it really highlighted football as a kind of key cultural phenomenon, and I suppose in some ways for young men that's where they were gaining a lot of messages around masculinity. And I wonder, is that something that you could maybe share with us from Hearts? Is this?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we were really interested in this for a number of reasons. I suppose Hearts, we're the largest fan-owned club in the UK, so we're owned by our supporters.
Yeah.
It's really important to us that we are representative of our whole supporter base, that we're there as a force for good in our community, and that we are aware of issues in our community, and, if you like, take a positive spin on how the club and its facilities, it's almost got a kind of religious church-like status in what is now a secular society.
Yeah.
And how we can use that magnet to bring people to talk about issues that they wouldn't be prepared to talk in school. So whether it's a kind of mental health issue, a sort of criminal justice issue, we can engage with young people in particular in a way that the police can't. They'll come, we do basic things like, we're talking about safety to kids who are running on railway lines. They won't listen to the police. So we send out our football coaches to talk with them.
Yeah.
There is a way of getting a message powerfully out to young people. And I think to host, as we did, this production in the stadium made it that bit more compelling.
Yeah.
I suppose the other reason as well is obviously we've got great connections into schools, particularly in southwest Edinburgh, but really across Edinburgh and into the Lothians, Fife
Yeah.
and the Borders. And in talking to head teachers, we have been aware that this is more of an issue.
Yeah.
We have a football academy where young people sign on, girls and boys sign on about the age of 12.
Yeah.
On a journey that might take them one day to become a professional footballer. And for some, this is not only their dream, but their parents' dream, and to an extent they can be kind of hothoused into this.
Yeah.
We've got a huge duty of care of them because they're not all going to make it. So we kind of help them develop alternative careers and so on. But from an influencer point of view,
Yeah.
we work with them on their safety online because people will prey on them. They are targets because they are seen as the kind of people who will then go on to influence others.
Others. Yeah.
So we will look not just at the young people, but we'll look at our footballers online, and if they're liking sites that we think are concerning, we'll actually do something about it and have conversations.
Yeah.
But there is, it was, I think, really what interested us in this production is that our young players could be made aware of these influences, and the fact that it is, two young players who are in the kind of B team, or in our case it would be the 18s,
Yeah.
to break into the first team at that kind of pivotal moment was something that people really could identify with.
Yeah.
And I felt it was treated very sensitively and very accurately. And for people outside, they are aware. These are, if you're in a school and two people are 16 in the Hearts Academy about to sign a professional contract, the whole school will know about it. So
everybody will know about it. The community
Yeah.
will know about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Absolutely. Yeah.
And they'll become role models. So it's really important that we can give them the input to kind of
Yeah.
keep them
Ha-
sort of shielded from this, and to understand the kind of the bad it can do for them and for others.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there to start to unpick, isn't there, really, about that kind of pivotal role that the pivotal role that football as an institution can play, as well as individual clubs, right down through to coaches, right down through to players, to the training academy. I mean, I've been out to the training academy, and I mean, I was just amazed at the mix of young people who were out there, all ages, playing football. It is a real, that span of ages, but it's also how they're connecting with, some of the players, how they're connecting with the coaches. So that's been really interesting, Anne, about, how Hearts sees itself, kind of the role as being part of solution focus, just both for young people, but also much broader than that. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
While we're waiting for Justin to rejoin us, Katie, I suppose I'd like to bring you in because, as you said in your introduction, Zero Tolerance does a lot of work in Scotland about kind of prevention, about male violence. And, it's just to bring back to what Claire was saying, about that need for work around this area. And I wondered, just as before we kind of get into the nitty gritty, really, what the work was, I wonder if there's anything you'd like to share about that kind of wider prevention work and the need for it in Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, Zero Tolerance is Scotland's expert organisation on prevention. And that means basically that we do a lot of gender equality work on a policy level, and also campaigns level, and influencing practice of people working in Scotland. My role focuses on children and young people. So I've been hearing a lot from teachers and youth workers in particular about a whole range of behaviours that they're starting to see from boys and young men, on a full spectrum of some young men who've already been radicalised by what they're seeing online, and then some young men who are kind of repeating misogynistic things and maybe not fully understanding what they're saying, and everything in between. And how that's creating a conducive context, an environment that is allowing gender-based violence or violence against women and girls to thrive and to continue to thrive. So when we heard about this project, we were really interested in what we could learn from the young people's experiences of the manosphere and incel culture, and how we can make recommendations about prevention. So we commissioned Civic Digits to produce a research report based on their work with the young people. And we've contributed from Zero Tolerance a literature review, and then some policy recommendations at the end. And that report really tells us where some of Scotland's young people are with this, what their understanding was prior to the project, how a youth work approach can be beneficial in preventing radicalisation and opening up the conversation about this. And I think it's something that, based on the, alarm bells that a lot of people working with young people in Scotland are feeling around this topic, I think it's something that's going to be really useful for the children and young people sector. And I'm really excited to publish it once we get further on with our editing process. But yeah, that's why we became involved as Zero Tolerance.
Yeah, and it's that real call to action, isn't it? I think that, as you're saying, through the work that's happening with Zero Tolerance, you're hearing stuff coming through from teachers, you're hearing stuff coming through from schools, you're hearing stuff coming through from youth workers who are at the many ways the cold face working with young people. And I wonder, Claire, can I just, I'm really interested around that initial phase of work that what happened with young people that really guided and developed, kind of really shaped the work that was coming. But I just wonder, because you don't work with young men and young women in St. Paul's, which is a youth setting over in Glasgow. But I just wondered, was there anything from that initial work about what this means for young people, about gender differences, about how young men maybe were viewing it differently, or were young women in a different kind of critique around it? Were they viewing it different? So is there anything you can share around what young people were actually saying?
The group in Glasgow, the young men in Glasgow who we worked with the most, were sort of, I suppose, sort of 12, 13, 14, a couple of slightly older ones, and they were white working class boys, and talked a lot about pornography, with no shame or kind of compulsion, being a bad thing. And they talked, but they were absolutely clear, like football was all about like pride in yourself, pride in your community, pride in being a man. And that was where they kind of got their sense of pride about masculinity from. And we talked about like how different footballers are represented in the media, and we looked at the kind of peacocking, kind of like how lots of football players might wear almost, we looked at photographs in magazines, and like there was a picture just randomly that week, there was a picture of a black football player who had a lacy outfit on, and so it was very sort of feminine, and we were sort of like talking about, so why can he do that? Could you do that? Could you wear that? Could you wear that down the street? What makes it okay for him to wear that as a man? And what makes it different for you or for somebody else to do that in a different space? So we talked about, I suppose that brought out kind of the issue of money and how money reinforces your masculinity, which is kind of really interesting concept. And I suppose started to pull out the idea of, masculinity being about being the winner, being the dominant character, the dominant presence, the dominant energy. And so we sort of started looking at sort of like the light and shade inside the idea of what a hero is, and particularly a football hero. It's about winning, it's about being rich, it's about being good looking, it's about being able to wear whatever you want because you're the top dog, all of those sorts of things. And how then that gets reflected in the pornography that they might be watching, and how do women behave in the pornography that they're watching. So if so that's how we started sort of unpacking that.
And they were open about discussing pornography, because you know what I mean?
Absolutely, 100%, didn't have any problem with it at all. In contrast, very, very much to the group of young men that I worked with Justin, really didn't want to talk about it at all.
I wonder then, because I've been doing this work for 15, 16 years, and I think even our understandings about the role of pornography has changed in that time hugely. I remember whenever I was out doing kind of public education and awareness raising, there was an absolute denial that it had an impact. No, absolutely not. Porn has no negative influence in our culture and our society. It has nothing to do with violence against women. So there was a real rejection of the idea of the impact. And I suppose where we are 15, 16 years later, we know the impact. In many ways, the research is showing that impact. So I think it's really interesting, that difference between the two groups. I wonder how can we learn from this about making safe spaces where young men and young women are able to talk about that, what I mean? Given that we struggle in Scotland to talk about sex and sexuality, we're still at that place. So I think it's really interesting from those initial workshops, what can we learn about how do we engage with young men to create safe, non-judgmental spaces that they can talk about this?
Yeah, well, I think, with both the young men in Glasgow, the young white men, and then the group of young men of African origin, there's such contrast, like completely different cultural context.
That
question. And then talking with the young women, they were the ones who brought pornography up. When we were talking, we never mentioned it. And this is true for all of the groups. We weren't the ones that brought pornography up. It was always the young people who brought it up. But the young women were the first to bring it up because that's actually completely true about the young men at Justin's group. We might have said, so what about if this character, which of these two characters might use pornography, to kind of start finding out what they thought, because there was a big taboo for them about talking about that. With the young women, they were, once we were sort of saying what makes a young man vulnerable to misogynistic ideas online, they came back like the next week saying, we think it's pornography and this is why. And they started talking about the amount of abuse that they experienced in school, the amount of times they were being sort of like, bits of pornography were being shared around by boys in classrooms where they were being forced to listen, if not watch.
Yeah.
Very, they talk about gore porn and kink porn and like the extreme rabbit holes of pornography that they saw their male friends going down, to the point where one of them was talking at one point about how a friend of theirs was very upset because he wasn't able to have sexual relationships with anybody, that wasn't just physically possible anymore because of his porn use.
Okay. And that's, I guess, is that kind of echoing some of that research I mentioned, Claire, that talks about, like erectile dysfunction now is highly prevalent amongst the 18 to 25-year-olds connected with porn use. So there's something there that young men themselves were starting to identify, even not for their own experience, but certainly amongst their peers, around those kind of impacts and negativity. And I think, like you said, there's an element that I think that we don't really factor in enough, which is about those cultural influences and what that means for young people as well, in terms of coming from different cultures, from different communities as well. I think it's about how do we take cognizance of that if we're trying to deal with gender-based violence, we're trying to deal with masculinity, we're trying to talk about those kind of broader concepts. How do we ensure that it's we're still culturally sensitive in some of that work?
Yeah. So to talk to that and maybe bring Caroline in a little bit afterwards, the thing that we felt really, really worked, one, it's essential that we were working with, I was working with Saki, who's a man of colour, youth worker. So me as a middle class white woman going into work with a completely, different life experience of those young people. I felt comfortable doing that. So it was really important that I was working with Zaki for in the first instance. But secondly, I think the key to making any space feel safe enough to talk, if there is a taboo, is to use creativity rather than to kind of come at it head on. So by creating fictional characters initially and unpacking who they were, to the point of, what do they like to eat for breakfast? What's clothes do they wear? What's their favorite band? Really kind of like developing an understanding of this as a human being who gets up in the morning and lives a life. Once we kind of done that creative work, it was much easier for all of the young people that I worked with to start imagining what their porn use might be like. If they're this type of person, what kind of porn are they watching? If they're this type of person, do they watch porn at all? Or what are they engaging in on the internet? So create the lens of creativity allowed all the young people that I worked with to sort of explore freely rather than feel like they were revealing something that could be seen as
gives that distance, doesn't it, that I think all of us, you know what I mean, that could be, if you're doing issue-based work, it's not about putting somebody on the spot necessarily and shaming them or expecting that kind of disclosure, but it's creating the opportunities that they can talk from a slight distance. And I mean, as a youth worker years ago, very often you knew whenever a young person talked about a friend and talk quite detailed about that friend's issue, I write, I think I know what's going on here, but I think that's really useful about us as working together in multi-agency ways, but it's looking at those creative approaches and how we can use creative tools to do some of that issue-based work with young people. And I wonder, Caroline, given that you're coming from the kind of arts-based sector, that kind of cultural sector, I wonder if you've got any reflections. Many good men use this tool, but I suppose it's what can we take from this wider and share within different sectors?
Completely, and I could, what Claire said completely resonates. It's that thing of, particularly with young people, that step away to depersonalize. You can open up a lot more. And in my experience, when you're opening up conversations with a young person, Often when you're washing the dishes or driving the car
Driving the
or going
car,
for a
yeah.
walk, you've got another activity happening at that time, and that opens and holds that space. Arts and creativity can be used in the same way, but as well, like, my firm belief is that creativity in the arts, in any art form and whatever it is, they're the building blocks of what make us as people, and it's how we find out who we are.
Yeah.
It's through listening to music, it's through hearing stories in plays and reading books, and arts in every aspect. It's how we find out who we are and how we find out about the world and our place in the world as well. And using tools, as Claire did, in that way to unlock a space that the focus isn't an interrogation on what is your pornography use and how do you feel about it and what do you do. It's so much wider than that.
Yeah.
It became an opportunity, and this is one of the things that I love about Civic Digits, the participatory practice that they unfold, the care that they take, and also how Civic Digits really genuinely takes all of this, listens, embeds, and takes it forward in a way to connect their artists and audiences when it becomes that showing and sharing. And all of that is a huge process that a lot of people don't see behind that,
Yeah.
within that exploration. And whatever that meeting point, if it's at the first point of, consultation and creativity, or whether it's just a young person who came into Tynecastle and experienced the show from the other side, all of that layering is so important because it was, taken care of. And I think that, widely across the arts, and those of us particularly who work in participatory elements of the arts and creative engagement, we see this every day. We
Yeah.
can see journeys, and in my 25-year career, what has given me the most satisfaction are those light bulb moments, those moments of discovery where people, you can see them unlocking and finding out about themselves, or
Yeah.
making a discovery, and creating that safe space can't be underestimated to do that.
Yeah.
And the conversation after as well. What's again gorgeous about Civic Digits, and particularly about this project, is that space is held before. You are within the immersive experience, and that was what was great about being in the stadium. It was an immersive
That
experience.
theatre, yeah.
And then afterwards, there was the space to discuss and unlock, not left to go out in the world. And I think that more and more creative practitioners should embed that across their processes if they want to genuinely connect with their audiences in meaningful ways, and to leave that legacy to that live moment. I think that's really, really vital and important.
And I just love this. I'm loving it, because there's something I think really powerful around, I mean, for me, we talked earlier about almost pornography, in some ways creates the scripts around relationships and intimacy. And we talked, Claire, you mentioned, and also Anne, around how influential sport can be in creating scripts and messages. And to hear then, Caroline, about, where we form our identity very often is through arts and culture, but how important that is then also the role of arts and culture in creating and counteracting and developing scripts and messages where people are placed within it. So it really strikes me across all sectors. It's about how we engage with this and look at our role within it, about countering some of the narratives, but also creating the spaces for ourselves and young people to develop alternative narratives that are more authentic in many ways to where we are and who we are. And Claire, I've seen you nodding there. Does that resonate with some of the stuff that came out of the workshops?
This is, I mean, in terms of the performance, which is what Caroline was talking about just there, it was really important. Like, I would never have wanted to write the play that we presented, like from the beginning to end. The idea is that we wanted to write a play that had a terrible outcome so that the audience could then rewrite the script themselves again. The whole point of the whole performance really was so that we could get to that point, so an audience felt like they were ready to have that conversation with each other. That was the purpose of the artwork, really, is that and I think everybody felt that came, actually, that they even, most people said something in those sessions. And there was it's a shame Justin isn't here, because he was one of the amazing interventionists in that. He brought his youth group to one of the performances, and one of the young men was jumping up and down saying, "But what is love? What is love?" to the characters. And Justin said, "I want to talk to the father," which for me was one of the most moving and important moments of the whole project, to see a grown-up man want to talk to another grown-up man about their child, and to want
Yeah.
to take care of that male child and say, I don't think you're listening to him, mate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's such a simple message, but it feels like actually that's the heart of it. What is love? And are you listening to your children? Are you respecting your children as an
Yeah.
adult man? Can you hear that? And can
It's
you
relationships, isn't
can
it?
you
You know what I
reach,
mean?
you be kind and caring and compassionate
Yeah. Yeah.
to
And
your
for anyone
and what is
who
stopping you? What is stopping you? It's the script of strong masculinity that's
Keeps
stopping
men in the
you
box.
from listening to your son, which is meaning that he cannot do anything but be radicalized by the awful content he's experiencing online.
Caroline, I'm going to come to you. Hold your thought there. I know I know you're busting with it, but it's just for, for this space. Justin obviously has had an issue with his connectivity and he's dropped out at the moment. So for anybody that's kind of watching and listening to this, Justin has left the building at the moment, but he will no doubt be rejoining us. He will be back. And also, I think a note of appreciation that somebody maybe listening or watching this who hasn't had the chance to see their performance that we keep referring to. So it may feel a little like what actually happened during that. I don't know. I wasn't there. Of course, I'm going to say to you, make sure that you go and read and everything that you can from Civic Digits, and Claire has done some media interviews around that. But Claire, I wonder if I can bring you in just for that recap about what actually happened in that performance for
In the
people who
show.
weren't there. Yeah.
The show tells the story of two young football players who happened by chance to be caught up in an incel shooting in Edinburgh. And they are shocked and dismayed by the existence of this idea of being an incel. They think it's terrible and wrong. And so they set up a campaign called Many Good Men to kind of counteract this influence online, to use their influence as football players to counterbalance the influence of incels, but they don't know anything about it. And so they dive in, starting to research the manosphere, and both or one of them, because we made two shows, one by young women and one by young men, the same premise, the same story, but different characters who kind of explored that narrative. One or both of them become radicalized by the content that they encounter online, and both shows end up with either one or both of them have basically losing all the positive relationships in their life.
Okay. That's a very good summary, Claire.
And also there's a short 3-minute video on our website, so you can see, you can get a good sense of what happened in that short video online.
I mean, I was able to go and watch the performance, and for others in there, I'll invite you to give a reflection on that. But I think what you said, Claire, it was a multimedia immersive experience to be there. It used many different forms in many ways in the performance to engage as an audience member. But I'd like maybe to take a little step back. And I'd like, Caroline, you had a point. Can I bring you back in on that? If you didn't get a chance. I know that was a few minutes ago, and if you're anything like me, it'll have gone. But I'm going to invite you back in again.
It was just again to pull together what you said about all of us working together, all coming at the same point from different directions, but how we can collaborate and use these tools together. And also what both Anne and Claire said about what are those signposts or pillars of reference for behaviour or for a sense of identity or community that these young people were encountering that was shaping them. And in that, in the show experience or in projects like this, it really is that sort of multifaceted personnel approach as well. When you spoke about that moment, Claire, with Justin talking to the father, there will be people who witness that will carry that, will have witnessed that script, and that will be an influence for them, that later at some point they will be influenced by that to speak up or to make that change. And that again just speaks to me about that legacy and that ripple effect. And again, and across the footballers and all the brilliant projects that you do, those are the moments that are building the young people, but also all the men all the people of all ages who are part of your club will be encountering that and encountering this. And again, it's, again, thinking about the young people involved, it's not about directly affecting change or speaking to them. It's about being proactive to them, to not send them down that road. But to me, what's really vital, particularly about projects like this, is about everyone else in their community and everyone else in the environment that surrounds any young person in society, and what everyone has to contribute, to say, to influence, and that every single one of us can play a part in that, positively or negatively. And I think that that's where that sort of multifaceted approach is so vital.
Yeah, and it's having that consistency, isn't it? That young people, hear a consistent message from adults in their life, workers in their life, in their communities, kind of broader than that, about that consistency and everybody kind of working together, using whatever skills, resources, expertise that we've got, putting it all into the pot and into that. God, there's loads here, isn't there, really, that we need to kind of cover. But Katie, I just want to bring you in because, we talked there about kind of culture and about prevention. And, sometimes I get a sense whenever we talk about preventing violence against women, it seems too overwhelming for people. It's too big. And I have a colleague who says whenever something seems too big, all you have to do is you break off a leg and you start to eat the leg. It's this idea we need to make it into chunks in a way to deal with huge, big issues. So I want to bring you in around that kind of preventative idea, picking up on what Caroline said, what Claire was talking about there, about us, kind of that combined effort. How does that chime, do you think, with stuff that's happening in Scotland around this issue about preventing violence against women, about attitudinal and cultural change?
Yeah, big question.
Huge, isn't it?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, that effective prevention is about everyone pulling in the same direction at the same time. If we're trying to change a system and a culture, we need to use systemic approaches and cultural change approaches in order to do that. So it can seem really big and really overwhelming, and there's no point in pretending that it's not big and that it won't take time. It's certainly a change that it's going to take generation at least. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something that we can all do to start. A good place to start is to think about your own biases. We've all grown up in the same system. We all have biases about gender.
That's really important, isn't it? Very often we think young people is like an isolated bubble, forgetting that we're part of this as well. You're right,
100%. And our approach to prevention at Zero Tolerance is not to frame young people as the problem. Young people are learning from us. They're learning from our behavior, our attitudes, what we tell them, but even more than that, how we ourselves behave as adults who work with young people. So starting with our own biases and trying to unpack them a bit, and then thinking about how we as adults working with young people can create those gender equal environments, is the best place to start. So if we're offering a craft session for girls, why aren't we offering a craft session for the boys as well? If we're hearing sexist language from the young people, how can we open up a conversation and encourage them to unpack where that's coming from and apply their own critical lens rather than just telling them to stop saying it. And if anyone's listening is interested in this, we've got training workshops called Under Pressure that are available for free for youth workers in Scotland, all about how to put that preventative approach, that gender equal approach, into practice with your young people. And they run multiple times a year. So that's available as a sort of separate space because, as I say, prevention is about gender equality in a nutshell, but it takes more than a few minutes to summarize it. So those workshops are available for anyone who'd like to learn more. And if in terms of how it links, I think you asked about how it links to what's going on in Scotland. Obviously, we have the Equally Safe strategy, which is Scotland's strategy for ending violence against women and girls. And it very much has that prevention approach embedded within it, understanding violence against women and girls as a gender equality related issue. But more needs to be done, to be honest, to create that systemic approach and to facilitate all of us to pull in that same direction at the same time, like I was talking about earlier.
And I think, we could spend a whole hour and a half talking about prevention and the national strategy and lots of that. I mean, I think if anybody is really interested, then Equally Safe is our national strategy. Go and look it up. It's got kind of 4 key pillars, and one of those is around prevention, and this is where this work is clearly located. But I think this work is really located in the mental health agenda. You know what I mean? It's linked into the sexual health agenda. It kind of is connected into many more strategic approaches and genders and policies. And what really struck me whenever I was thinking about this work is just this week, the announcement has been that Scotland has, fully signed up to the UN Charter for Children's Rights. And I think, that's a really useful lens maybe to look at some of this because, you know, young people have a right for their human rights, but also one of those is that young people, we should be preventing young people being exposed to harm. And I think, you know, we're kind of suggesting, talking here that many of the influences in our culture are harmful to young people. They're giving them harmful messages. And just to pick up on your point, Claire, you mentioned about almost young men, whenever you talked about that footballer wearing lacy, you know, gear and clothes, why was he able to do it and other young men aren't? And it comes back to those narrow boxes that young people are put into, genders are put into, behaviors and expectations. So I want to pick up on how do we engage? You create a picture for me, Claire, about, you know, those sessions with young people. How do we get young people to engage with what we can feel is really controversial, contentious, difficult, challenging topics? But how do we get young people to engage with those? You know, how do we actually create the environment that young people feel I can engage with this topic, given very often it's framed as the negative. You know, Andrew Tate is negative. Incel
Yeah,
culture
the
is negative,
young-
masculinity is negative. So how do we kind of bring, especially how do we engage with young men on this? What did you see happening? Justin's not here, but you know, what did you see happening that
Shame that
could
Justin
really
isn't here. It would be really great to hear from him about this and how he saw any changes that he saw, because he works with the young men that took part in this project. He
Yeah,
worked with them week in, week out for years and years. He's known them probably since they were babies, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Built was a very tight youth club that does amazing work, and does a lot of football as well,
Yeah.
as well as tech staff, as well as now drama, also music. What's the question? How to engage with young people? I think well, the reason why we're doing this is because yourself and Katie were part of the safeguarding committee, so that was really important, kind of like
Yeah.
foundational formal processes and structures that we put in place in terms of safeguarding for the workers and for the young people. I think it's absolutely vital, and we put a lot of time and effort into thinking about what was like a really deep risk assessment for this project right at the beginning, before we worked with any young people, making sure that, and as part of that safeguarding thinking process, we worked out that we felt that we could absolutely not work with any young people that weren't already embedded in a supportive environment.
Okay.
So we found youth workers initially to work with, so that the responsibility wasn't all on me in terms of the safeguarding. I had a partnership in each of those two groups of young people that I worked with professional, very experienced youth workers who were there to support the whole process, but really to keep an eye out on the safeguarding.
Yeah.
And then we reached out to the youth groups that we ended up working with through those youth workers. So they had connections to those youth groups, and each of those youth groups or groups of young people were embedded in their own communities. So they that space where they met every week to do work with us would continue to be there after we left.
Okay.
And continue to be there forever, really. In as far as they were concerned. And the people that weren't actually in the room knew why we were there and what we were doing in that room. So we really tried to work on building that trust and respect with each of those institutions, that the youth group and the school, that they trusted us and we trusted them, and they knew exactly what we were planning to do. So they didn't suddenly go, "Why are you talking about pornography with our children?" Like, no, you know, we're very transparent.
Front of the Scotsman, do you know what I mean? That's the kind of fearful headline that people are worried about, isn't it?
All of that kind of building up of layers of trust and transparency and clarity about what we were doing and why we were doing it, and how the absolute priority at every stage of the process was the safety and security of those young people. And if anything was threatening that, we just stop. You know, nothing was more important than that.
Yeah.
So I think that's
the core then, isn't it? What I'm hearing here is about that prep, those relationships.
And I think when you've done that work, you feel secure as the worker in that space and why you're there, because you've developed, you know, a multitude of relationships in order to come to that space with those young people. And if you feel confident, then you feel, and I think the young people then understand that confidence, like in a, you know, a visceral way. So there's that. And then I just think it's you know, just try to meet the young people where they are. and be genuinely curious about what they think about this stuff, which I
Yeah.
genuinely was. I wanted to work with young people to co-write this play and I conceived of this whole project as a co-writing participatory project because I'm not a young person. I don't get access to the spaces that they are bombarded with.
Mhm,
They are
mhm.
targeted, sometimes relentlessly. Now, I've got a 9.5-year-old son, and he knows so many of these words from the manosphere. He doesn't know why he knows them or where they come from. But I'm very shocked, that this is the amount of,
Yeah, that it's kind of become part of his language and lexicon
like it's
in a way.
become part of his culture,
Yeah, at
this
9.5.
misogynistic language, yeah.
Yeah,
And it's not, and I think if I hadn't have done this project, I wouldn't be spotting that this isn't just like young people speak.
yeah.
It's not just kind of like a generational gap. It's these words are representative of a way of thinking that is really dangerous.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, there's so much here. And Anne, I'm very aware, and Caroline, that and Katie, to hear from your good selves on this. But I think there's something I just want to pick up on there is about there's something that struck me about almost embedding the work into, Justin had a youth group that he'd worked with over time. This was embedded into that work. The work was going to continue with young people. It strikes me, Anne, that whenever you were talking earlier about kind of what happens within Hearts, it's not just about somebody parachuting in if work is going to happen and then off they go again and leave it all behind. There's something about everybody coming on board as part of that journey, isn't there? You talked about how important that kind of concept of community, I suppose, within Hearts football. It's fan owned, but it's about that idea about how do we get everybody involved if something's going to happen from every level, that people build up that trust and know exactly what's happening and the reasons behind it. Does that chime with the kind of the approach that you would have within Hearts about trying to do issue-based work or bringing some of this in? But with
Absolutely. And actually, we're going to be doing more work with Youth Link Scotland on the What is a Man project through our charity Hearts. But in terms of community involvement in this, one of the really interesting things was that we have a very wide social media reach. We have over 300,000 followers across different platforms. So we shared on social media that we were doing this, and we amplified what Civic Digits was putting out. We did a piece for the BBC, and that caused it was a great platform for discussion between supporters. There's a fans forum called Jambo's Kickback, and it can ranting about, the manager picked the wrong player last night, but it can also pick up very big issues. And I think the fact that the club had chosen to support and highlight this and create awareness allowed that discussion to be held. And there's almost a kind of self-policing that when any sort of misogynistic comment came onto the forum, it was kind of slapped down by others because there's a feeling that the club has picked up that this is an issue in society. And as a community, we do need to realise it's there. We do need to be looking after our young people. And it was actually quite a good educational thing for some of the people who were on that forum. So I think we hadn't thought of that as an outcome at the start of it, but it was definitely something that was very positive.
That's really interesting, isn't it? That it's not thought of as an outcome, but it's like an unintended consequence that kind of happened with it about broader community discussions and almost, I mean, I thought that was really powerful what you said. It's, how this issue then kind of went out broader than just the work that was happening with the young people. It kind of went out much, much wider for discussion. Again, it creates those discussion points, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which is hugely important. Can I pick up on Claire about safeguarding?
Mm.
Because obviously through this project, and you went through an experience yourself at the start, whenever you were kind of exposed to some of this content online as part of the research and development, but you're bringing young people to a project that potentially is exposing them. And how can we prevent young people then, almost like what happened with the two young men and many good men, going and doing their own research and actually entering into the rabbit hole that goes down taking the red pill for young people? Like, if we're doing this work with them, like other issue-based work, how do we create the balance there about not exposing them to risks and unintended where they're going to go? How do we, as workers, as arts workers, as sports workers, as prevention, how do we all kind of keep that in our mind, but not be so protective of young people that it's like young people, we can't ever expose them to sex education. We can't talk to them about these issues because as a sex educator, we used to get told, well, you don't talk to them about sex because they'll go and do it. You know what I mean? I think, how do we create those? I know, Anne, you're laughing. I mean, but I mean that, you know, that idea, let's not just not talk about it because then they won't do it. And in reality, we know that's not what happens. But I just wonder, how do we create those spaces, which is still about broad enough that young people can really explore these issues, but also being mindful of what we potentially are exposing them into in terms of where they may go with some of this. Does that make, is that clear where I'm coming from on
Yeah, I
that?
think
And I'd
so.
love, sorry, just before you start, I'd love to hear from you, Caroline, as well on that, about if we're talking about the arts sector and doing issue-based work, what of those things do we need to be mindful of?
So one practical thing that we did, or we tried to do, was we gave all of the participants phones that they had, which didn't have any, like that, you know, so we gave them the equipment to be able to do the research online that wasn't attached to their own identity. So
Okay.
they had a clean sort of you know, they created emails so that they could access YouTube and look at the content on YouTube. So the sort of one of the research tasks that we gave them was, now that you've got your character, imagine or imagine that there's another character and they're going to type in how to get a girlfriend because they want to find out what it means to be an
And that's a common question for young people, isn't it? Do you know what I
Right,
mean?
let's start with the basics. Let's just put in how to get a girlfriend. Now, if you're asking young people to do that, we don't want to ask them to do that with their own email address. Like
Yeah.
that's a basic thing that you can do to help protect
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, yeah.
And explain to them why as well. So as part of the process of giving them a phone and explaining why we were doing that and that it had its own individual email address and the accounts were all set up for them. So
Mhm.
we're saying, you can use this space because any data that anybody's collecting about you from this research doesn't touch your identity and the emails and your use of the internet outside of that. So that was, and so that was also a learning because you don't
That's
necessarily
big
know
learning, isn't it? Do you know about
how data is collected about you and how you are targeted as a young man, as a young black man, as a young woman. You're going to be targeted with different messages and different content just because of the profile that's been set up for you have set up for yourself and because of what you've watched historically. So we kind of gave them that sort of like clean slate, if you like, on the internet for that research. But it's a really serious question that you just have to be sort of present with and alive to, because I suppose, you know, and there were moments along the process when I did feel very concerned about what it was that the young people were looking at and what they were thinking and talking about. And I suppose and I talked about that with the safeguarding committee. I think, and then I said, well, you know, what is the risk of not talking to them about this? What is the risk of letting this not be something that is, you know, because they will be engaging with this on some level anyway. So yes, that we, you know, we might be looking at, for example, an interview. One of the nastier things that we looked at was an interview with an incel, and that, you know, it was pretty tough. But it felt like this is an opportunity. We're all together. We can talk about this and support each other to think and to develop skills to think critically about this. Whereas the chances of you ever being in this kind of environment and receiving this kind of content are that you'll be on your own.
Yeah.
And you won't know what to do with it. And
Yeah.
it's that which makes people so vulnerable, is because this content, even like, you know, I guess for most of us here growing up, there might be sort of difficult content on the television, but your mum and dad or your family or your carers would be around you. They'd be, you know,
or in my case, family,
watching it in a secret room if you managed to, you know, because you wanted to watch something that you knew nobody wanted you to watch.
Yeah.
And then that's okay. You know, all young people have to
explore, experiment,
and make mistakes and all of that. It's about sort of, I suppose we wanted to meet the young people where they were, hear what it was that they were already watching and what they already thought about it, and then from there try to unpack it and think, well, where might this lead if you were a different person and you were thinking about this, you know, through a fictional character's point of view, and you didn't have a girlfriend and you wanted to find out how to get a girlfriend, what kind of messages would come at you? Yeah.
And I mean, I think there's something really powerful in that idea that young people are already doing and engaged with this. They're already in this space. Us deciding not to speak about that to them doesn't change that fact. And actually, something you said there was about young people having the critical skills, develop the critical skills around this.
Yeah, and the
Caroline,
practice of also, because I want to think, I suppose in the end, simple things like taking the, if you see something that upsets you and you don't want to talk to your parents or adults about it, go and talk about it with your mates. Find out
Yeah.
what your mates think about it. You know, you can practice critical thinking with those around you. Doesn't
Yeah.
have to be with adults. Like, great if it is, if that's what you need, but it's about, you know, taking back ownership over this content that comes at you.
Yeah. And it's also the powerful use of peer, isn't it, as well? Encourage them in terms of engage with their peers around that kind of peer role, peer influence. Caroline, I'm just conscious that I invited you to come in there, and then I've kind of kept you silent. But it was around, you know, what it was around, you know, for the art sector, what can it learn from some about issue-based work and kind of safeguarding with young people?
I mean, it was hugely interesting to me hearing all of those measures, Claire, because again, you know, down to that digital content footprint, those are things that aren't seen and aren't thought about often across the board. There was a huge trend within theatre and youth theatre for many years about verbatim work, taking young people creating their own work, devising work from their own stories. And that's something that a lot of lessons were learned on how to do that, which everyone's talked about, that step away, the step to character, and not, you know, fully being exposed or being vulnerable, and protecting young people as they're creating in a safe space, but you know, protecting their own stories as well. I think that, to me, every good project should start from this point of safeguarding, so that you can then, the adults, and, you know, you and your co-facilitator, Claire, felt safe in that space to do that. What resonated with me most was that within this project and the mindfulness of it and all of it, really thinking about it, the idea of isolation versus community, and that within that, this is where the point of intervention has its strength, that through the sense of shared or exposure within that shared environment, it's a completely different experience to going and investigating it on their own and then feeling isolated, or going down that route and then seeking out the community through the isolation. Yeah. Through that shared exposure, through that beautiful thing that teenagers do where they just go and they start laughing out of feeling uncomfortable, that they then demystify it slightly and create a different atmosphere. And it's in that sense of peer-to-peer, they then align themselves with the read of the room. And from that, the discussion unfolds and they can be more honest in it. That is beautiful facilitation, and that's communication and true connection. And more, the arts should be making work in that way, should be connecting in that way. But it's about getting those initial measures right in the first place and not making it an afterthought. For me, that's really important, you know, across everything. And, you know, I think that a lot of the creative tools that artists have aren't just about a performance outcome. It's not just about those sort of performing arts outcomes in any way. Much like for Anne, it's not always about the match. What are those skills used for in all of those different ways, making those connections? A lot of my personal practice is based on connection, connecting artists and audiences, connecting people with each other, connecting human beings with each other's stories, to see the world in a different way, to see a perspective that's not your own, to take something away and pass it on to someone else. That's what I believe. And in the International Festival, we're known for presenting lots of global stories across lots of different genres. But in the work that we do in participation, it's all the offstage, or, you know, in the changing room stuff, you know, for Anne, is the off-match stuff that we do through the year that I believe has, you know, the most impact and the most long-lasting impact. And we can only do that through working with artists and companies of the standard and calibre of Civic Digits, who can only do what you do, Claire, through collaborations with people like Katie, with people like Linda, with Anne and organisations, and what Anne does. This is the point that it works is when the collaboration and connection is there. And through that, that's where we're going to leave the biggest impact. That's just
Yeah.
my reflection on it.
Amazing. I mean, I've been jotting this all down, and it's like, oh my, and I'm just so
It's a great
aware as
conversation. Honestly, it's a
said,
really interesting
it's
conversation.
it really is. And I mean, there's loads that, like, I'd love to go, Caroline, let's have a 2-hour conversation about that idea and that concept. Katie, you were talking about this, and you know, I could spend hours. And my God, Hearts community fan owned, the role and influence. There's so much, but I'm just so mindful for anybody listening to this that we've kind of kept you for quite a while and we've got a short time left. And I want to bring you in because obviously where we are, we're in the summer of 24. The Euros have been on. The Tartan Army, in terms of kind of that representation of football, Scottish football, in terms of the fan base. We know the reaction that they've had across Germany and different German towns, you know, so football, and at the moment, it's a huge, 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 huge thing. I just want to come back maybe to yourself around, you know, if we're coming, this meeting's coming to an end, maybe at the end of it all, if you had to share almost like a light bulb from this project, something that has really struck you. You talked about light bulbs, talked about light bulbs. What would be the light bulb from this project? And what might you say to other football clubs, what would you say to them about this project and other issue-based work? So what's been your light bulb? And then what would you say to other football clubs who may be hesitant about stepping their toe in issue-based, gender-based violence work?
I think I'd give them the most positive encouragement I could. It's interesting, football often gets held up. There's a statistic that's been put out for years in Glasgow that says domestic violence increases on days of Old Firm games. There's probably a more worrying take on this that says it might well be peak, but there is a thought that it's because there is so much more police on the streets on the day of an Old Firm that the domestic violence that is there all the time is actually more exposed.
Mm-hmm.
But football has a way of engaging men. You know, the profile of the average fan is still maybe about 70% men. In the men's game, the women's game is growing, which is a really positive thing, and engages in a completely different way to a completely different audience. The average age is around 35. You know, these are these are potentially influential people in society and in community. And I think there is a duty of care, not just to the footballers, but to the community itself.
Mm-hmm.
To get these messages out, to take a responsible role in society. Claire, you mentioned the fact that, you know, I think particularly in England and in the Euros, you'll see these people earning £200,000–400,000 a week. You'll hear about £100 million transfers for the person who won the Golden Boot. You know, in Scotland, it's a completely different world.
Mm-hmm. You said we don't give out as much cash up here then, Anne. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, not at all. Not at all. You know, it's a short career. Yes, they'll earn more than their peers, but that might be for 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, 15 years if they're really lucky. So there's not, yes, they are revered, but they're not on that kind of crazy stratosphere of ridiculous earning. And I think they're perceived to be different. And I think they are. And I think clubs really trying to do this, you know, this phrase of they're one of our own. I think clubs can use their players to engage society, and to have players talking about this as well is important. One, to protect them as they're in that kind of very delicate and vulnerable stage, getting to be a footballer, but also once they're there. And, you know, we used footballers, we started a project called The Changing Room, which initially was for men to come in and talk about their mental health, where they wouldn't do it in a clinicized setting. But they would do it. We used the captain at the time to talk about the kind of his mental health issues, the pressures you have as a footballer living in this kind of very precarious world of, if you're injured, you're out, for example, or the whole crowd is baying at you because you've made a mistake. So that encouraged men then to get involved. We've then got a women's mental health group that's kind of gone to, we now have a refugee mental health group dealing in different languages.
Banding out,
So, you know, these things are great examples, and I think there's a great cross transferability to deal with this subject. And I would encourage, and I have been trying to encourage the footballing authorities who, if you like, lead what's happening in Scottish football to embrace this as well.
So, I mean, I guess it's a call to action is what I hear from you, and to a positive call to action to other football clubs to recognise the role that they have within young players coming through, how they can kind of work with them, but also with their community. But it's also about that kind of bigger messaging, isn't it, in a way that issue-based work can be done. It can be done in really positive ways. It can be embedded into other work, but it's about, you know, football clubs creating spaces actually to have dialogue, whatever, discussions, you know, captains, whatever. So I think that's a huge call to action. So I look forward to seeing what the other football teams do now to and to meet that call of action.
Yeah, partnerships are critical to
And
this.
that's it.
We're not subject matter experts in this, but if we
Yeah.
can engage and use that platform, then we should be doing that.
And again, it's that, isn't it, that it brings us back round to where the conversation was earlier about that need for collaboration and partnership. That's brilliant. Caroline, time's moving on. If you had a light bulb that you wanted to share, what really has struck you from this work? And then what would you say in many ways about doing within your sector, within your kind of, you know, I mean, your own sector, about issue-based work, what can be done around issue-based work, violence against women work within your own sector?
I'll start with the sector question, because for me, what needs to happen is that there is a higher profile and higher regard for this work and the impact of this work and the strategic importance of the partnerships formed and needed to do this work well. For me, within the wider arts sector, you know, there's an understanding that this work is happening and there's an appreciation for it. But in terms of profile, I think a lot more profile could absolutely be attributed to this, and a respect for the professionalisation needed to create this work and the, you know, the ripple effect of that. I think that to me is like one takeaway, that I would want more exposure, more recognition from across the sector for work like this and the impact that it has. But also not for everyone across the arts to think, oh, I can do that, because again, this takes a real specialism. It takes a care to do it right and to have it done to that high quality of professionalism. Not everyone can do this. You can't, you know, play in a concert hall and be an exquisite concert hall musician, but be also able to teach. Some people have that superpower, some people don't. It's exactly the same about work like this. Claire's very gifted that she can write a play on her own, but she is also so talented at making space to write a play collaboratively. But a lot of what we talked about today wasn't about the play. It was about everything else with this process. And so the arts are there embedded within this as a tool, really. But again, it's about that sort of wider governmental advocacy. It's about that wider global exposure and advocacy and awareness. And that will come when your report is published. That will come when there is a ripple effect and we can start to see that. You know, I feel this project has been so timely coming out of COVID, because in COVID, I think a lot of people went down those rabbit holes through isolation. And we're now in the sort of the outcome of that. From more work like this happening and intervention, what is the next stage and what does that look like? But what is the next project that can be done to take the next step from that? I think that to me is what's interesting. For me, light bulb moment, I will bring back to experiencing the performance, but this is for anyone out there who is a parent. So putting my parent hat on, not my arts worker hat on. I'm very lucky to be a parent of children who one identifies male, one identifies female, both different ages. And I saw the performance, thinking of them at different points as a mother, thinking as a mother with my daughter, and thinking of a mother with my son, and how my role in their lives and their influence around this issue is so vital. And really thinking about, my son's about the same age as Claire's son, about that moment in their lives and what goes forward, but also thinking about my daughter in the world experiencing all of this. What does that look like? And my light bulb was really taking away, that's what resonated with me. That's what I took away, was that feeling of, you know, the play takes you to that really dark point. You then problem solve it. I walked out of the stadium and thought, wow, okay, I'm going to take this and help me problem solve that in the real world.
Yeah.
And, you know, for anyone out there who is a young person, take that and know that you can speak to your parent about this situation. Vice versa, anyone out there who is a parent, it can then take on board all of that learning. And coming back to that idea of role modeling, be that role model, be that influencer from having been influenced yourself. I think that's.
And again, that's really powerful, Caroline. It's that we all have dual roles, and therefore we've got many opportunities in which to influence and to build those connections.
Yeah.
In order to kind of shape and push some of the conversations and the change that then is needed.
Oh, it's just coming back.
Justin has just arrived back in the last 2 minutes. So there we go. Justin, lovely to see you back. We're just coming to our last 2 minutes. Claire, actually, I'll not come to you, Claire. Katie, I wonder for you, is there a light bulb and a kind of key learning that you would like to share to other practitioners, really?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a policy officer, I spend a lot of time thinking about the whole system and the policies that are in place and how they work together. So the light bulb moment for me from this project was a sort of a reminder of the power of grassroots work and of creative practice for doing interventions with young people, and how powerful that can be for prevention, to create the time and the space to take young people on a journey and really explore something. And I think it's something I want to keep in mind as I'm thinking about policy implementation and how we put those big structural things into practice on the ground. And there was loads to learn from the young people's experiences in cell culture, how they embodied gender, what they think the causes of radicalization are. And as I say, I'm excited to publish Zero Tolerance's report about that in the coming months. So lots more to learn if anyone wants to read more in the future.
Can't wait for it. You know, and a good plug there, Katie, but everybody keep an eye out on Zero Tolerance, and no doubt be promotion or kind of publicity around it. But I think it's going to be really important to see what was the impact on young people and how they understood some of this issue. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Justin, it's lovely to have you join us. Just as we're about to end, I know you've got your hand up there. But you've just kind of come in at the end, Justin. We've really missed having you there to kind of pick your brains on some of that direct work with the young people. But I mean, just in the very short space of time that we have left, I wonder, is there a light bulb for you through the work that you were doing with the young people? Was there a light bulb through this overall project?
Okay, thank you very much. But Justin, can you hear me very well?
Not too great. It's a little bit crackly for myself, Justin.
Oh. Yeah, I guess maybe because I was actually not working directly at the office. Yeah, so I guess that's why the connectivity was really poor.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to be able to connect back before the session is over. Yeah, so, but for me, one of the key things I'll take from working with the young people is the fact that they can be very honest. And it's not something that youth workers like myself should take for granted. Appreciate their honesty and do everything within the rules to support them as much as possible. And giving them and also realize that once you are always honest with them and you give them listening ears, they find it very easy to confide in you if they're having any sort of challenges. And it also helps to build their confidence, especially when you are not judgmental in your approach in dealing with them.
And I think that's an amazing summing up. It is about building those relationships that allow young people to be honest, and what we can learn from them, Justin, isn't it, as well? But as you say, it's about creating, in some ways, it's about having some of that courage. Don't worry, Claire, I am coming to your good self.
I have a question for Justin.
Alrighty, go on. We're running out of time, but I'll
Quickly,
allow you as the project lead to have a question for Justin. Go on ahead there, Claire.
I just wanted to know, Justin, if you saw a change in the young men's attitudes towards any of these issues over the period of the workshop, over the period of the project.
Change, do you mean in the way they relate to ladies, for instance? That's what you mean?
I suppose maybe the easier way of asking it is that did the young people talk to you about the project and
Yes,
what they say?
yes, they did. Okay, I get your point. Yes, they did, and they were very much excited about it. And through this, they also look forward to be part of more of this. The only well, should I say the main uh, not a regret sort of, but like they wish they had there are more boys like themselves be part of it. Yeah, so because what they learned is something that's so valuable that they love to spread it amongst themselves, but they would have wished more boys like themselves were part of it. Yeah, so because there were quite few who joined, probably,
Yeah, there were
and not
5.
just probably exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
because of their age. Yeah, because we actually work with those who fall within the required age for the project. Yeah, so but more of the boys in our group are also getting to that age just now. So maybe if the project continues, yeah, more boys will be able to join.
Brilliant, Justin. Thank you so much.
thanks.
You're welcome.
And I think, you know, there's something there that the young men took part in the project, but they want to do more. And I think that's probably testament to the considered work approach that was done, but probably, I mean, down to yourself as well around some of that facilitation and how young men were brought on board. If they're left wanting more, then I think that's an indication of a pretty good job done. You know, Claire, I'm going to come to yourself just to kind of bring this to a close in many ways. You know, what was you were heavily involved in what was quite an intense piece of work.
Mhm.
And, you know, you asked Justin there, did he see any change in the young people? I want to ask you, did you see any change in yourself? And what was your light bulb moment?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I suppose the change that I saw in myself was that I started with fear. I think when I came across this subject, I had a lot of fear of what it meant, of the enormity of it, of like the sense of overwhelm, often a sense of overwhelm in terms of like, I'm never going to be able to see enough stuff. I'm never going to be able to read enough stuff. I'm never going to be able to understand enough about what's going on to be able to do this well. And also, it's at points it was really difficult because you were seeing things kind of a lot because I was sort of deep in research, and you start wondering whether that man walking past you on the street, that man that's getting into the lift when you're on your own in the lift, you know, that kind of secondary trauma kind of innings of thinking, you know, is this affecting me? Is it affecting my relationships with men? Because I'm thinking this is how most men think, when obviously it isn't. So there was a whole range of issues which, you know, I was also careful to put in place some well-being support for myself. And I spoke about it quite a lot with you as well, Linda. That was something that came up, and you were really great at asking me this question regularly to kind of check in about how I was doing. And then the light bulb moments, I suppose it sort of happened a couple of times along the process of actually making the show, finding those amazing actors that we found to work with, those the young actors in particular, also Gavin, but in a different way, who was the Joker. But the 3 young actors, they were in their early 20s, and they were so open to all of these questions. They were so enthusiastically engaged, emotionally engaged with the purpose of the project, and threw their whole selves into it creatively, and, you know, committed like 100%. And that was an incredibly healing thing for me, to realize, to really realize the truth of the whole project, which I'd sort of the premise that I'd started with, which is vast majority of men do not agree with any of this content and are shocked and disgusted by it, and they want to be allies. We just don't know how to be allies, and we need to start working out how to build those connections and build those bridges between the myths and lies that are told about what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. How do we break down those myths and lies and build bridges between us? Because we have different life experiences, it doesn't mean to say we can't be allies. And I suppose my experience of making that show with those extraordinary young men who were the actors, I mean, also the young people, they were extraordinary too, but it's a different kind of light bulb moment. Seeing those young men kind of really wanting to jump in and take part and commit to it made me realize that there's the truth of the premise that I started with, And that was my key light bulb, I suppose.
And that's a nice way to kind of bring it round, isn't it? That where you started in many ways and what you believed needed to be done was really important. The work has shown that. You know, that's the value, isn't it? About creating those connections, creating those spaces, and not losing hope that actually there's many good men out there for which this is not. They don't want to be part of this manosphere. They want to reject these negative notions and tight boundaries around masculinity. They want to be part of those conversations to create that broader cultural change. And I think that's a really positive place to leave it, because it can feel very dark at times, some of this work.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I suppose for me, it is about kind of picking up on what you said, Caroline. It is about how much consideration needs to go into this work. And actually people can do it, but they may not, people can be part of this, but they may not be the right people to lead at that right time. But we all are part of it. We all have a role to play. And in the interest of kind of keeping this to a manageable, listenable and watchable piece for everybody else out there, and there's, you can tell there's much more we would love to cover in it, and we'd love to cover much more from yourself, Justin. But I think just to kind of bring it to an end, I've been jotting down lots of words, as you can imagine, that's kind of come up consistently. And I think I also want to share a light bulb moment. I went to one of the performances and was incredibly moved by it. Having been involved in the project the whole way through, there was something really special about seeing that end performance in many ways. But there was one moment in it whenever I watched young men watching parts of it, and it was watching their reactions to it, and that was my light bulb, and that was my call to action to say, okay, we really need to be engaged on this issue. So it was actually what my light bulb was, being with young people in this space while they were going through the process themselves. That was a very powerful experience for me. Privileged, to be quite honest, in many ways, to be part of that. I've jotted down the lots of words, and ones that keep coming up today have been that this work needs to be credible for young people, that it needs to be authentic when we're doing this work with young people, that we need to create conversations, and multiple conversations. We need to communicate, and we need to collaborate, and we need to connect. That we need to be creative, and we need to create safe spaces that allow consideration. That we need to have courage in order to move this forward, and to create opportunities for young people to really develop their understanding about who they are in a broader culture that very often wants to pull them in directions that they may not want to go into. So I think that's some of my reflections from what the conversations was this afternoon. I want to thank everybody. Now, if we're all in a room together, we'd be finishing off our coffees and potentially talking about continuing the conversation in another space. That's not where we are in this world, but I want to thank Katie. I want to thank you, Anne. I want to thank you, Caroline. Like, hugely interesting. Justin, I'm so dying to speak much more in depth with yourself about that work, but we will no doubt get opportunities to capture your learning and reflections from that in other ways. And Claire, I just like to bring it to a close to say thank you so much for all the work that Civic Divots has done on what was really quite groundbreaking work in Scotland. I know that the next phase of the project, you're heading off to Romania, and there's ideas that this work will continue. But I want to thank you from those initial conversations kind of a few years ago about highlighting the need for work to be done, to where you made that commitment to take it forward. So thank you so much for it. I want to thank everybody who's taken an hour and a half out of your time to listen to this. I will say to you, go and read all of the information about Many Good Men on the Civic Digits website. Go and watch the films, go and watch news reports in order to get a real sense of what this work was. And I would also do a call to action to all of you. Are you going to have the courage to create these safe spaces for yourself, for young people, and for your communities, to actually look at how you can collaborate and be creative in constructing, in many ways, some of the paths forward on this really pivotal kind of big issue that we're talking about? Because I believe that, you know, young people have rights, and this is a rights-based approach that we're talking about, and this is about equality, and all of us have a piece of the puzzle that we can start to create the ripples that will affect change. So I want to thank you all for taking the time, and I can't wait to hear from you all what you're going to do about this issue in your own context and settings. So thank you very much, everybody. Look after yourselves, and we can't wait to hear what onward that this piece of work may have created. So thank you, everybody.